In 1938, the United States drafted the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and drew an invisible, devastating line in the sand. Virtually overnight, the regulatory agencies determined that anything pulled directly from the soil or harvested from a field could no longer be spoken of as medicine. Food was reclassified as mere caloric fuel. Only engineered, patented synthetics were allowed to cleanse or heal. If a farmer claimed his harvest cured the body, his harvest was legally classified as a misbranded drug. The commercial food giants happily complied, boiling the ancient healing properties out of our pantries. But here is the part nobody talks about. Over the last decade, peer-reviewed immunology and hepatology journals have published studies vindicating the exact foods the ancients survived on. Modern medical imaging has quietly proven that the very ingredients Scripture heavily prioritized are fundamentally designed to flush out industrial waste, for reasons no one in 1950 had the microscopic tools to see. The ancient texts were not speaking in metaphors. They were giving us an operator's manual for human detoxification. Number 14 on this list contains a compound that forces the human liver to synthesize its own master cellular defense. For 70 years, the chemical agriculture industry bred it entirely out of our meals, until a 2012 clinical trial proved this forgotten compound actively neutralizes modern industrial pollutants. Number 3 requires a preparation method your ancestors used to survive famine, yielding a complex substance no laboratory has ever been able to mimic. Today's multi-billion-dollar supplement industry has tried to put its effects into a capsule and utterly failed. These 20 biblical superfoods will rebuild the natural detoxifying architecture of your body from the inside out. The industrial food conglomerates and mid-century chemical agriculture cartels spent the entire 20th century replacing these staples so they could extract massive profit from empty, shelf-stable calories. They sold you synthetic convenience while robbing you of your biological defenses. Most people will go their entire lives without realizing what is missing from their plate. You are about to know exactly what it is. Before we start, hit subscribe. It is time to reclaim the vital internal defenses they tried to make us forget. Let us count down. Number 20, sun-cured raisins. In 1977, the commercial snack boom taught an entire generation of parents to reward their children with engineered fruit gummies synthesized in factory vats. The ancient preparation required nothing but the raw red grape and the relentless Mediterranean sun. As the fruit shriveled, the immediate concentration of resveratrol and phenolic acids doubled, creating a dense packet of insoluble dietary fiber. When ingested, this fiber structure bound to bile acids in the lower intestine, physically trapping metabolic waste and hauling it out of the body. You were not eating a sweet. You were ingesting a biochemical broom. The refined gummy confection industry replaced this single-ingredient ancient staple with high-fructose corn syrup and red dye, mocking the dried grape as outdated. But pulling waste from the lower gut was only the primitive first step of the body's hidden machinery. Number 19, crushed garlic. It was not until 1944 that a chemist named Chester Cavallito finally isolated the volatile, pungent molecule that ancient desert wanderers swore by for physical endurance. That compound was allicin, but it only existed when the clove was physically crushed, causing two distinct cell compartments to rupture and mix together. Entering the bloodstream, this aggressive sulfur compound headed straight for the liver, stimulating phase 2 detoxifying enzymes. It attached to heavy metals and environmental pollutants, making them water-soluble so they could be frantically flushed out through urine. The sharp bite on the tongue was the literal taste of biological defense. The modern pharmaceutical industry synthesized isolated versions of immune stimulants, quietly abandoning the raw clove as an unpatentable peasant remedy. Yet sulfur was not the only way to pull heavy metals from your tissues. Number 18, unprocessed coriander seed. During the late 1990s, clinical studies measuring heavy metal accumulation in modern citizens suddenly discovered that one particular herb was acting as a flawless biological chelator, mentioned as early as the Book of Exodus. The coriander seed and its leafy green counterpart contained an interlocking web of potent antioxidants, including terpenine and quercetin. When these microscopic particles hit the digestive tract, they magnetically bound to neurotoxic compounds like lead and mercury hiding in lipid tissue. They pried the metals loose and carried them safely straight to the excretory system. It was a quiet, Ruthless biological eviction. The commercial flavorings industry extracted the mere aromatic oils for processed food, deliberately leaving the fibrous metal-binding shell to rot in industrial dumpsters. Evicting those metals was vital, but the cellular damage left behind required something entirely different to heal. Number 17. Raw flaxseed. In the 1950s, the mass adoption of synthesized, deodorized seed oils completely erased this ancient, fragile seed from the Western kitchen table. Spun into linen for priestly garments and eaten for vitality, the raw flaxseed held an incredibly rare concentration of alpha-linolenic acid. When the seed was cracked open by the teeth, it released mucosal repairing lignins directly into the stomach. These lignins coated the inflamed walls of a damaged intestinal tract, soothing the microscopic fissures where harmful compounds usually slipped into the bloodstream. It shut the front door of your immune system. The industrial margarine complex convinced housewives that artificially hydrogenated vegetable spreads were safer, classifying flax oil as an unstable nuisance. Once the gut was sealed, the organs needed an aggressive solvent. Number 16. Raw onions. Long before the 1968 advent of the microwave TV dinner turned vegetables into lifeless, soggy starch, the raw onion was recognized as a survival-level necessity. Eaten by the laborers who built ancient temples, its stinging juices contained heavy prebiotic fibers like inulin. Unlike regular starches, inulin survived the harsh acid of the stomach completely intact. It traveled down into the dark cavern of the colon, where it served as premium, explosive fuel for beneficial bifidobacteria. By multiplying those specific bacteria strains by the billions in a matter of hours, it crowded out the harmful microbes that secreted lethal endotoxins into your bloodstream. The frozen TV dinner cartels boiled the sulfur and prebiotics completely out of their heat-and-eat trays, leaving nothing behind but an empty, flavorless shell. But while the colon needed fiber, the kidneys required something far more elemental. Number 15. Deep well water. Water was the single most referenced substance in all of Scripture. Yet after the 1974 Safe Drinking Water Act ushered in mass chlorination, our relationship to it completely fractured. True deep well water was fundamentally different from what came through a modern tap. It carried an electrically charged payload of trace minerals, magnesium, calcium, and potassium pulled directly from bedrock. These dissolved minerals were necessary to keep the kidneys constantly flushing blood urea and cellular ammonia into urine. Without that precise mineral balance, the kidneys became sluggish, hoarding water and allowing water-soluble metabolic waste to back up into the bloodstream. Municipal water treatments aggressively chlorinated and stripped out these vital trace elements to protect industrial pipes, completely ignoring what it did to the human kidneys. And a sluggish kidney desperately needed the exact route your grandfather likely ignored. Number 14. Sulfur-rich leeks. In 2012, a pivotal clinical trial finally confirmed why ancient populations prized this sharp, stalky vegetable above gold when sick. The dense, fibrous layers of the leek contained specific organosulfur compounds. When these struck the human liver, they did not just act as an antioxidant. They actually commanded the liver to rapidly synthesize its own master cellular defense, glutathione. Glutathione violently attached to free radicals and xenobiotics, neutralizing them before they could mutate your DNA. By eating the leek, you were literally giving your liver the chemical blueprint to armor itself against invisible urban pollutants. For 70 years, the chemical agriculture industry heavily bred leeks to be sweeter and less pungent, actively breeding the bitter, life-saving sulfur out of existence for the sake of supermarket palate appeal. If the leek acted as the armor, another ancient fruit acted as the peacekeeper. Number 13. Whole sun-dried figs. During the vicious low-fat craze of the 1980s, corporate nutritionists demonized the fig for its dense caloric weight, missing its mechanical brilliance entirely. Famous for pressing into poultices in biblical accounts, the fig's true power happened internally. A single whole fig held hundreds of tiny seeds suspended in thick, soluble pectin. As this matrix moved through the upper intestine, it rapidly absorbed water, swelling into a gel that captured rogue cholesterol and toxic bile acids like flypaper. The tiny seeds simultaneously scrubbed the mucosal lining, ensuring the entrapped compounds could not be reabsorbed into your blood through a sluggish bowel. The processed baking industry isolated the fig sugar for items like the fig Newton, entirely destroying the fibrous scrubbing matrix with extreme industrial heat. But wiping the gut clean was useless if your cellular engines were rusting from the inside. Number 12. Wild raw honey. Sometime in the late 1970s, the introduction of ultra-cheap high-fructose corn syrup quietly replaced this golden, enzyme-rich liquid in the American diet. True unheated honey gathered straight from the comb was not merely a carbohydrate. It was a living, antimicrobial substance loaded with propolis, flavonoids, and active enzymes like glucose oxidase. When consumed raw, it continuously released microscopic amounts of hydrogen peroxide directly into the gut biome, annihilating harmful bacteria without damaging beneficial flora. It reduced the body's overall infectious bacterial load, dropping the systemic inflammation that otherwise exhausted the liver's detoxification bandwidth. The commercial syrup industry trained the public to accept dead, pasteurized, corn-based slurry in plastic beer bottles, insisting sugar was just sugar. Yet even the purest honey could not ungunk a chemically congested bile duct. Number 11. Mustard greens. In 1992, researchers at Johns Hopkins isolated a chemical compound so profoundly protective it sparked a revolution. Yet ancient farmers had been eating the raw plant for millennia. The sharp, peppery mustard green belonged to the cruciferous family, housing a ferocious defense mechanism called glucosinolates. When chewed aggressively, an enzyme converted these naturally into sulforaphane. Sulforaphane directly upregulated the phase 2 liver enzymes, grabbing highly reactive fat-soluble industrial compounds, including modern pesticides, and conjugating them into harmless, water-soluble waste. It fundamentally forced a sluggish, backlogged liver to clear its industrial backlog within hours of ingestion. The iceberg lettuce industry dominated grocery shelves with watery, nutrient-void crops, quietly pushing the bitter, powerful mustard leaf into obscurity. And directly alongside those bitter greens, the ancients relied on the blood of the fruit. Number 10. Red pomegranate arils. By 1999, cardiovascular texts began admitting that the blood-red fruit carved into the ancient temple pillars held the circulatory key to waste removal. Detoxification was severely limited by blood flow. If the organs could not receive fresh blood, they could not dump waste. The pomegranate was packed with punicolagens, which were brutally efficient at protecting nitric oxide in the bloodstream. This forced narrowed, stressed blood vessels to violently dilate and relax. As the arteries expanded, a rush of oxygenated blood flooded the liver, the kidneys, and the skin, accelerating the extraction of deep tissue metabolic debris. The synthetic juice concentrate cartels pasteurized the life out of this fruit, sweetening it with additives until it was legally a soft drink. Once the blood was pumping, it needed a stable protein to build its detox machinery. Number 9. Sprouted lentils. When extreme pressure canning machines hit the commercial soup market in the 1950s, the biochemical power of the ancient lentil was boiled down to a mushy shadow of itself. The famous staple of Jacob's stew carried a locked vault of phytic acid. But when soaked and sprouted in water, the lentil underwent a rapid cellular awakening, multiplying its bioavailable B vitamins and folate overnight. Folate acted as the primary ignition switch for the body's methylation cycle, the biochemical engine that disarmed free radicals. The sprouted fibers acted like microscopic sponges, soaking up circulating estrogen mimickers from modern plastics and ejecting them safely downward. Industrial canneries destroyed the sprouting tradition by flash heating raw legumes to near molten temperatures, entirely annihilating the fragile methylation vitamins. But even the strongest methylation engine seized up without proper lubrication. Number 8. Cold-pressed olive oil. Beginning in the late 1950s, the disastrous lipid hypothesis crusade erroneously told an entire generation that all fats caused heart disease, effectively banning this golden liquid from the health-conscious kitchen. Extracted purely by crushing the ancient fruit under stone, true, unfiltered extra virgin olive oil contained oleocanthal, a phenolic compound that behaved exactly like ibuprofen in the human body. When this heavy, monounsaturated fat hit the duodenum, it violently signaled the gallbladder to contract. The gallbladder squeezed out a massive influx of stored bile, acting like a chemical power washer that flushed out fat-soluble waste trapped in the liver. It lubricated the entire digestive tract while systemically halting cellular inflammation. The American Heart Association and the seed oil cartels pushed artificially extracted, bleach deodorized vegetable shortenings as heart-healthy, completely replacing the ancient fat with a highly unstable industrial lubricant. As the oil flushed the gallbladder, a sticky desert fruit stepped in to catch the debris. Number 7. Cured black dates. When the 1980s low-carb panic declared war on anything tasting sweet, the deep, nutrient-dense date was unjustly thrown out alongside highly processed white table sugar. Thriving in the harshest desert climates, the date palm concentrated potassium and magnesium into sticky, dark flesh. This exact ratio of electrolytes was mathematically essential for the sodium-potassium pump inside human kidney cells. When a date was consumed, it rapidly stabilized the osmotic pressure in the kidneys. It allowed them to relax, open their microscopic filters, and actively excrete ammonia and urea into the bladder without dehydrating the surrounding tissue. It was pure, bioavailable electrical conductivity wrapped in heavy, bowel-clearing fiber. The artificial sweetener industry spent millions convincing the public to eat zero-calorie chemical synthetics like aspartame, ignoring how those exact chemicals strained the kidneys they claimed to protect. But the kidneys were just the filter. The actual gut biome demanded a living culture to wage war. Number 6. Raw goat's milk kefir. Following the aggressive blanket pasteurization mandates of the 1920s, the living, breathing, bubbling cultures of ancient nomadic herdsmen were outlawed in nearly every Western city. Cultured at room temperature in a leather skin or glass jar, raw goat's milk fermented with kefir grains created a violently active bacterial soup. It yielded over 40 distinct strains of beneficial probiotics that survived stomach acid with ease. When they reached the human intestines, they physically colonized the lining, erecting a biological barricade. They hunted and consumed the pathogenic yeasts and putrefactive bacteria that constantly leaked septic endotoxins into the bloodstream. It replaced the dead, sterile flora of a modern diet with an aggressive, living army of defenders. The commercial dairy lobby eradicated these fermented milks, selling the public ultra-pasteurized, homogenized, sugar-laden skim milk stripped of every single living protective enzyme. With the gut colonized by living bacteria, it desperately needed a matrix to hold them in place. Number 5. Ezekiel's sprouted wheat. In 1961, the Chorleywood bread-making process was invented, utilizing violent, ultra-high-speed mixing and chemical conditioners to inflate dough in 2 hours instead of 3 days. The biblical recipe for bread layered wheat, barley, beans, and lentils, demanding a long, slow fermentation. Sprouting these grains physically shattered the phytic acid walls that otherwise locked up zinc, magnesium, and iron. Once the yeast slowly fermented the dough, it pre-digested the gluten proteins, transforming a heavy, inflammatory starch into easily absorbed amino acids. This bread acted as a slow-release prebiotic mesh. It swept the intestinal walls cleanly, without triggering the violent spikes in insulin that exhausted the liver's metabolic capacity. The megacorporate commercial baking industry replaced this living fermentation with bleached white flour and dough conditioners, selling you an artificially puffed sponge of empty carbohydrates. While they destroyed the bread, they performed an even more vicious sterilization on the vine. Number 4. Dark fermented red grapes. When sensational headlines in the 1990s tried to solve the French paradox, wondering why people who ate heavy fats had pristine cardiovascular systems, they ignored the ancient medicinal roots entirely. Whether eaten whole with seeds intact or fermented carefully into pure, unadulterated wine, the dark purple skin of the ancient grape held staggering levels of resveratrol. This active polyphenol slipped past the blood-brain barrier. It acted as an incredibly potent scavenger of single oxygen-free radicals, neutralizing the oxidative exhaust created when the brain and liver burned heavy energy. It aggressively dropped systemic inflammation, signaling the organs to stop panicking and begin the secondary process of tissue repair. The heavily processed synthetic juice and beverage industry boiled these skins down to a high-sugar concentrate, treating the miraculous polyphenol matrix simply as a disposable waste byproduct. Yet there was one ancient staple that neutralized cholesterol far better than the grape. Number 3. Whole grain barley. Sometime during the 1970s refined carbohydrate boom, this survival grain was quietly deleted from the human breakfast bowl. Surviving the harshest droughts in the Levant, The whole barley grain contained an extraordinarily dense concentration of beta-glucans. When slow simmered in water, these complex soluble fibers exploded out of the hull, forming a massive viscous gel inside the digestive tract. This gel acted like a physical dragnet. It caught rogue, oxidized cholesterol and hormonal waste directly out of the bile ducts and tightly bound them. Because the human stomach could not break beta-glucans down, the entire mass was smoothly swept out of the lower colon. Today's multi-billion-dollar supplement industry has tried endlessly to extract beta-glucans into expensive synthetic pills, utterly failing to replicate the mechanical sweeping power of the whole hydrated grain. After the dragnet swept the gut, the liver needed a violently sharp shock to wake up. Number 2. Wild bitter hyssop. As regional supermarkets took over the American landscape in the 1950s, agronomists deliberately scrubbed nearly all bitter flavor profiles completely out of the vegetable aisle. Used for ceremonial cleansing across the ancient world, wild hyssop and similar bitter herbs contained aggressive phytonutrients that shocked the human tongue. That violent bitter taste was not a flavor. It was a neurological trigger. The instant the bitter alkaloid touched the taste buds, a vagus nerve signal fired directly into the brain, crashing down into the liver and stomach. It instantaneously commanded the stomach to dump hydrochloric acid and ordered the liver to forcefully squeeze stagnant, waste-loaded bile into the intestines. It woke up the entire gastrointestinal tract with a single bite. The commercial agriculture taste modifiers engineered vegetables to be sugary and bland, effectively turning off the necessary neurological triggers that kept our grandparents' detox systems constantly firing. Yet all these plants, all these fibers, and all these herbs were merely scaffolding for the ultimate cellular rebuilder. Number 1. Pasture-raised lamb. In the post-World War II panic to mass-produce cheap protein, the entire agricultural system pivoted to grain-fed feedlot cattle, completely abandoning the ancient rhythms of the shepherd. It is the centerpiece of every major covenant, every Passover, and every feast. When an animal grazes directly on wild grasses, bitter herbs, and sun-drenched soil, its meat transforms. The fat layers saturate with conjugated linoleic acid, and the flesh becomes packed with pure, bioavailable sulfur-bearing amino acids, cysteine, glycine, and glutamine. These are the exact 3 literal puzzle pieces the human body requires to assemble glutathione. The steam still rises from the roasted meat, the heavy fat still warms the blood, and the amino acids dive directly into the liver to rebuild broken cells. It is not just a meal, it is the living architecture of cellular repair, an ancient covenant of soil, animal, and human. The industrial feedlot machine destroyed this elegant cycle, stuffing animals in cages with genetically modified soy and antibiotics, turning life-giving meat into a vehicle for the very inflammation it was meant to cure. That ancient covenant of the soil is what we lost, or rather, it is what they deliberately took from us to make room for profit. What began in 1938 with a stroke of a pen ended up entirely rewriting the human immune system. We forgot the natural aggressive cleansers of the earth in a single generation because our dietary amnesia was limitlessly profitable for someone else. They labeled ancient biology as a myth. But biology does not care about federal definitions. It only cares about what you swallow. Here is my challenge to you. Procure and eat one of these this week. Just one. Crush a raw clove of garlic, find truly cold-pressed olive oil, or slow-simmer whole-grain barley. I started grating raw garlic into my daily regimen, and the chronic fatigue I suffered from for years vanished. Share which one you are going to eat in the comments below. I want to know if raw local honey gets more love than the sprouted grain bread. I have my pick. You have yours. The desert wanderers knew exactly how to survive the harshest environments on Earth. Now, you know.